His name is not in your textbooks. It is not on any museum wall. It is not attached to one of the greatest archaeological discoveries in human history. But without him, that discovery never happens. His name was Frank Calvert, and the man who took everything from him is the only name you know. This is the story they left out. Before there was a dig, before there was a headline, before Heinrich Schliemann ever set foot in Western Turkey, there was Frank Calvert. Calvert was a British diplomat stationed in the Ottoman Empire in the mid-1800s. He was not famous. He was not wealthy enough to fund a major excavation on his own. But he was obsessed with one question that serious academics had long stopped asking. Was Troy real? Homer's Iliad described it. Achilles fought there. Helen's face launched 1,000 ships there. Every scholar of the time treated it as myth. Beautiful myth, but myth. Calvert did not believe that. He spent years studying the landscape of northwest Turkey. He read every ancient source he could find. He surveyed the terrain on foot, and he landed on a mound called Hisarlik. Most people walked past it. Calvert could not stop looking at it. By 1863, he had started digging quietly, carefully, with his own money. What he found underneath that mound changed his certainty into conviction. The layers of settlement, the pottery shards, the architectural remnants that matched descriptions from ancient texts. This was not a natural hill. This was a buried city, and Calvert believed it was Troy. He did not have enough money to go further. He needed a partner. He needed funding. He needed someone with resources and connections and the ambition to see this through. What he found was Heinrich Schliemann. Schliemann was a German businessman who had made a fortune in the California gold rush and in trade. He was self-taught in classics, obsessed with Homer, and desperately hungry for fame. He wanted to be the man who proved Troy was real. When Calvert met with him and shared everything, his research, his surveys, his excavation findings, his theory about Hisarlik, Schliemann listened carefully. He asked detailed questions, he took notes, and then he went to work making sure the world would only remember one name. Schliemann arrived at Hisarlik in 1871 with funding, a crew, and the backing of the international press. He dug aggressively. He dug destructively. Archaeologists today cringe at his methods. He plowed through layers of history looking for Homer's Troy, and in doing so, destroyed evidence that could never be recovered. But he dug, and in 1873, he found what he called Priam's treasure: gold, jewelry, weapons, artifacts of staggering value. He announced to the world that he had found Troy. The headlines named Schliemann, not Calvert. Calvert protested. He wrote letters. He published articles. He pointed out clearly and with documentation that the site was his identification, that the foundational research was his work, that Schliemann had built everything on a foundation Calvert had laid over a decade of quiet, underfunded, overlooked effort. The academic community heard him. Some agreed with him. A few wrote about the injustice privately. None of it mattered. Schliemann had the gold. Schliemann had the press. Schliemann had the narrative. And in the 1870s, as today, the person who controls the narrative controls the history. If this is already making you question what you thought you knew, you're going to want to stick around. Hit subscribe. There's a lot more where this came from. Here, it is what makes this worse. Schliemann knew. This was not an accident of credit. This was not a misunderstanding between colleagues. There was correspondence letters between the two men that show Schliemann understood exactly what Calvert had contributed. He thanked him. He asked for more guidance. He leaned on Calvert's local knowledge, his Ottoman contacts, his years of accumulated expertise. And then, in the public record, he minimized all of it. In his own published accounts, Calvert appears as a footnote, a helpful local contact, a minor figure who pointed Schliemann in a useful direction. The framing was deliberate. The erasure was methodical. Schliemann also made a critical error that Calvert had warned him about. The Troy of Homer, The Troy of the Trojan War was not in the layer Schliemann triumphantly excavated. He had dug too deep. He had gone past it. The treasure he called Priam's treasure predated the Trojan War period by over 1,000 years. He named it wrong. He celebrated the wrong layer. He destroyed the layer he was actually looking for in his rush to find it. Calvert had raised this concern. Schliemann ignored him. It was not until decades after both men were dead that archaeologists confirmed Calvert had been right about the site, about the layers, about the methodology. The Troy, most consistent with Homer's descriptions, sat in a stratum that Schliemann's brutal excavation had compromised beyond repair. The man who got everything right got nothing. The man who got the most important detail wrong got everything. Frank Calvert died in 1908. He received modest recognition toward the end of his life, a few academic acknowledgements, a handful of articles that tried to restore some credit. But he died knowing that every popular history book, every newspaper archive, every public monument to the discovery of Troy carried one name, not his. Even today, most people who know the story of Troy's discovery know it as Schliemann's story. The name Frank Calvert does not appear in most school curricula. It does not appear in most documentaries. It does not appear in the headlines written every time a new discovery at Hisarlik is announced. The archaeology world knows, the specialists know, but that knowledge has never crossed over into the version of history that most people receive. This is how erasure works. It does not require burning documents. It does not require a conspiracy. It requires something much simpler and much harder to fight. It requires one person with money and press access and the willingness to control how the story gets told. Calvert had the discovery. Schliemann had the platform. And the platform won. There is a direct line from what happened to Frank Calvert in the 1870s to every field, every industry, every story where the person who did the foundational work is not the person who gets the credit. The mechanism is always the same. Resources flow to visibility. Visibility rewrites memory. In 1993, over 100 years after the excavation, a historian named Susan Allen published the first full-length biography dedicated to Frank Calvert. She called it Finding the Walls of Troy. It is not a bestseller. It is not taught in schools. Most people alive today will finish this video and still never encounter Calvert's name again unless they go looking. That is not an accident. That is what successful erasure looks like. The walls of Troy are still there. Archaeologists are still working the site. Every few years, a new finding makes international news. Headlines still tend to reference Schliemann. His name is attached to the site in the public imagination in a way that cannot easily be undone after 150 years of repetition. Frank Calvert identified that site. He put his own money into it before anyone else believed. He guided the man who would take the credit. He spent the rest of his life trying to correct the record. His story answered him with silence. Remember what I said at the start, his name was removed. Now you know the exact moment it happened. It happened the first time Schliemann spoke to a journalist and chose not to mention who showed him where to look. One conversation, one omission, 150 years of forgetting. There are more names like Frank Calvert. Names attached to discoveries, inventions, ideas, and movements that history filed under someone else. Some of them we will cover on this channel. If this is the kind of history that makes you uncomfortable, the kind that makes you want to go back and check what else you were told wrong, then you are in the right place. This is Sri Unplugged, and we are just getting started.